The push-up. A basic movement, but one that can grow a lot of muscle if you do it properly. Here's how to do the perfect push-up. Welcome back, Dr. Milo Wolf here with Wolf Coaching, teaching you how to take your push-up game from 0 to 100, and also taking your grandpa sweater game to the next level. Double XL grandpa sweater. Eric Bugenhagen famously called me a pencil neck while wearing the sweater.
The neck girth looks good in proportion to the head, but the collar is a bit loose, okay?
So, very important. Pushing aside the concerns about the sweater, let's get back to push-ups. What makes for good push-up technique? Well, we identified 3 factors that make an exercise technique better for hypertrophy. First, having an appropriate tempo. Many people doing push-ups make the mistake of just dropping to the ground and busting out as many reps as they can possibly do. This isn't increasing your hypertrophy, and in fact, it's likely decreasing it. Based on all the studies we were able to find looking at muscle growth from different tempos, a good repetition lasts for about 2 to 8 seconds. And based on some more speculative evidence, you might want to slow down on the lowering phase a bit more and be more explosive on the lifting phase. Additionally, we have identified that the stretched position is important for hypertrophy, so controlling the lowering phase a bit more as you reach that bottom position. Pausing briefly and then exploding up might be beneficial for hypertrophy. What I'm trying to say is, don't just do as many reps as you can possibly do with dog shit tempo. No one's getting laid because you could do 50 push-ups versus 30. Just use a technique that's going to maximize your hypertrophy. On the other end of the spectrum, if your repetitions take more than like 8 seconds, you're likely reducing hypertrophy as well. So there's kind of a sweet spot between around 2 to 3 seconds probably, to about 8 seconds, where you don't want to be going faster than that or much slower than that. Next, we have the momentum generated by non-target muscle groups, or essentially cheating. On a theoretical level, getting the target muscle close to failure is important. As for example, we have a meta-regression by Robinson and colleagues showing that the closer a set is taken to failure, the more hypertrophy it causes. So whatever technique we use should take the target muscle, the one we're trying to grow, as close to failure as possible. AKA, it should be the limiting factor. There's not a ton of ways you can cheat the push-up, but there might be a couple things you can do to make the chest more likely to be the limiting factor. If you want to make the chest a limiting factor, flaring your elbows out a little bit more might be beneficial. If you want to make the triceps and front delts more likely to be the limiting factor, maybe you want to tuck your elbows a little bit more. But ultimately, the push-up is going to target several muscle groups pretty well at once. It's going to target your front delts, it's going to target your triceps, your chest, both your upper and lower chest, and it's also going to target the serratus anterior, which is a muscle that doesn't really get trained all that well during most other pressing movements because you're not moving your scapula around freely. And for what it's worth, I think this muscle is aesthetically a little bit underrated. It's not something I would consider too deeply in my programming, besides just including stuff like dips and push-ups in your program. But when you're lean, it can look pretty cool. The next component of good technique we identified in a review paper is range of motion. Specifically, using the right range of motion could have a meaningful impact on your hypertrophy. It could potentially give you 10 to 20% more hypertrophy, and the main thing to look out for in terms of range of motion is making sure you include that stretched position. Including that stretched position consistently causes more hypertrophy than if you just do top half partials. And there's even some newer studies, once again, suggesting that lengthened partials could cause more muscle growth compared to a full range of motion. So just doing that bottom stretched half could lead to more muscle growth compared to doing the full rep. At the very least, the stretch is not something to skimp on. So you could either do lengthened partials or full range of motion repetitions, or you could even extend the set with partials when you can't quite get another full rep on the push-up. We have a study looking at this idea in the calves that's going to be published soon, where essentially we compared just doing full reps on the calf raise to doing full reps, and then when they couldn't get another full rep, keeping going doing stretched partials. And then like doing stretched partials after full range of motion failure, we observed a 50% roughly more hypertrophy. So doing some stretched partials after failure on push-ups might be a way to increase hypertrophy as well. Because we want to maximize the stretch in the push-up, there are a few things we need to pay attention to. First, we want to adopt roughly a shoulder width hand placement. Any wider than that, and we typically restrict elbow range of motion for your triceps quite a bit. Any narrower than that, and we typically reduce both elbow range of motion and pec range of motion. Second, we'll want to avoid resting our body on the floor at the bottom of each rep. If we rest on the ground at the bottom, as it means to take a break or whatever else, we're relieving tension from that stretch position. which is the opposite of what we want, so that would be silly. Third, some people, when they're doing push-ups, drop their hips quite a bit. And then, when they get to the bottom, their hips touch the ground prematurely, ending the lift before they get deep enough. So if you find that your hips are consistently the first thing to touch the ground when you're doing push-ups, consider lifting them up a little bit so that you can get deeper and get a deeper stretch. And finally, strongly consider a deficit push-up. It'll achieve two things that are probably important when it comes to increasing muscle growth. First, very obviously, by elevating your hands, you're going to be able to get deeper before you touch the ground, getting a deeper stretch in your chest, triceps, and front delts, which will likely increase hypertrophy. Secondly, and this is less obvious, it'll shift the dynamics of the movement such that there's a bit more difficulty at the bottom, the moment arm is largest, and then as you shorten the pecs, triceps, and front delts, the moment arm reduces. So essentially, it's making the lift a little bit harder in the stretch position and a little bit easier in the shortened position. A final tip for implementing the push-up within your program, besides using a deficit, right technique, etc., is to generally have it sequenced second after some other pushing exercise. Most people who've been training for a while will be strong enough to bust out 10, 20 plus push-ups, and so doing push-ups second after some other chest movement can allow you to train them with a more reasonable rep range. There's nothing wrong with higher rep training, but it can just make it a little bit harder to gauge whether or not you're as close to failure as you think you are. And specifically, compound movements like the push-up, or like squatting, or like deadlifting, generally are more appropriate to lower rep ranges, as you won't be as out of breath, and you won't have as many other stabilizing, supporting muscle groups that could give out first before your pecs, triceps, or front delts do. The final component of good technique that we didn't actually identify in the review paper, but that I think is important as a coach, is the following: preference and pain management. If a certain technique feels like more fun, and you do it more consistently as a result, than another, consider sticking to that technique. For instance, if you prefer doing slow reps, really feeling your chest stretch out, maybe taking 3 or 4 seconds on the eccentric, and you enjoy that more, and it's still ticking those boxes of what makes technique good for hypertrophy, by all means do it. Similarly, if a technique gives you pain consistently, consider changing it. Even if it doesn't maximize hypertrophy, pain is something to pay attention to. For instance, if regular push-ups tend to cause you some wrist pain, you could try using push-up handles. Anecdotally, that's helped me. Without further ado, here's how to use perfect push-up technique for your chest. First, grab a couple of parallel bars, some push-up handles, or some plates, or some boxes. Anything that is stable and sturdy and allows you to get a deeper stretch. Position these so they're around shoulder width. Keeping your hips reasonably flexed so you don't needlessly restrict range of motion, lower yourself to the ground over 2 seconds at least. Go as deep as you can. On the way down, flare your elbows as much as is comfortable if your aim is to predominantly hypertrophy your chest. Pause briefly when you reached that deep stretch position. Then push yourself all the way up, exploding out of that bottom position, or about halfway up, to around a 90-degree elbow angle for lengthened partials. It can be very tempting on push-ups to go faster, as it means to get more reps or make the set easier. Similarly, when it gets difficult, some people tend to rest their body on the ground at the bottom. Avoid both these things as they reduce hypertrophy in all likelihood. Where and when you breathe is mostly personal preference. I would probably recommend breathing out freely during both the lifting and lowering phase, just because on push-ups, you'll be doing quite a high number of reps usually, and you don't want to be gassed out before you reach failure at the muscular level. But you could also try performing a Valsalva maneuver, wherein you brace, push up, and then breathe in freely on the way down. That is the perfect push-up technique to maximize stretch, maximize hypertrophy, make it more likely the chest limiting factor, and more. Let's go through the technique checklist and make sure we've hit all of those main pillars of technique according to the science. We had at least a 2-second eccentric, an explosive concentric phase, and we're even pausing at the bottom, slowing down the lift a little bit at the bottom, to make it more lengthened biased. Next, we're emphasizing the stretch position even more by using a deficit, which both allows you to get deeper and generally makes the bottom position a little bit more challenging compared to the top position. If you want to take this a step further, you could even use lengthened partials. As far as limiting momentum in body English, the main thing to pay attention to will be flaring your elbows a bit more, potentially, to make the chest limiting factor, or tucking them a bit more to increase the involvement of the triceps and front delts. That's the video, broke down how to perfect your push-up technique to maximize muscle growth. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. If there are any other exercises you want to see me cover, let me know down below. If you're like, alright, Dr. Milo Wolf with your fake PhD in sports science, I see you. I don't want to be thinking about all this. Isn't there something else that can take care of this for me? Lucky for you, there is something else. And that something is called MyoAdapt. check out myoadapt.com. We're releasing a training app we've been working on for years. This training app will provide you with the perfect movements for each muscle group and each rep range to build muscle. It will do all of this for you at a much lower price point than the average coach. MyoAdapt will be released within the next few months. So if you go to myoadapt.com right now and sign up to be notified when it does get released, you'll be able to log in at a lower price than you would at any other time point. In the meantime, if you'd like me to coach you, check out the link above and we can make that happen. Thank you for watching. Have a phenomenal rest of the day, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.